We're gonna find out what happened to some of the most popular old mobile games, starting with Angry Birds. In the early 2010s, this game was a global phenomenon. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing Angry Birds plushies, t-shirts, or even lunchboxes. But by the end of 2019, the franchise had become a complete ghost town, and the original game would get deleted off the App Store. This is because Rovio, the company behind Angry Birds, spent the past decade milking this franchise to the ground. As soon as the first Angry Birds was a success, they took the opportunity to make countless spin-offs like Angry Birds Seasons, Angry Birds Transformers, and Angry Birds Space. These entries were doing pretty well at first, until about the 20th rendition, when people realized they were just doing the same game over and over again, meaning it was now time for Rovio to switch up the formula, and in 2015, they came out with Angry Birds 2, a sequel to the original game, but 20 times worse. With microtransactions out the wazoo to limited lives you'd had to pay for if you ran out, Angry Birds 2 was a huge step down from its predecessor. The game was now becoming every other mobile game, squeezing every dollar out of your bank account, and they had no signs of slowing down. Due to the overwhelming amount of in-game purchases, the sequel was a smash hit, resulting in them going all in on the monetization by launching even more spin-offs, theme parks, and an Angry Birds movie. With the plot serving as the origin story of the iconic Angry Birds, fans seemed to love the movie enough that it would make over $300 million. Needless to say, Rovio was cashing in with all their new doubloons. However, that money wouldn't last for long. After 2016, every new Angry Birds spin-off was failing, and Angry Birds 2 was losing more and more money each year. They would try to recoup their losses by making a movie sequel, but that ended up being a huge financial disaster. So with profits plummeting and their franchise at an all-time low, they would have no choice but to abandon their older titles. All of the spin-offs we mentioned earlier, like Angry Birds Space, even the original Angry Birds, were taken off the App Store. The downfall would continue, with Rovio laying off over 200 of their employees, and diehard fans of the once beloved franchise losing interest entirely. They would try to revive the Angry Birds brand by remastering the original game, but that didn't really do much because the damage had already been done. Angry Birds was now considered a dead franchise, ruined by Rovio's greedy tactics, and with no new game on the horizon since 2022, it's safe to say the future of Angry Birds is looking pretty grim. But a mobile game that does have a bright future ahead of them is Subway Surfers. It's still one of the most downloaded mobile games every year and constantly reinvents the wheel with new content and fresh footage for those YouTube shorts. When it first dropped, it was just one of the many endless runners that flooded the App Store, but while those games eventually lost steam, Subway Surfers kept pushing on. Instead of just relying on nostalgia like other mobile games, the developers make it their duty to constantly update the game with the addition of world tours. Every month, they switch up the game with a new location, changing the map, and adding new characters, which therefore always gives players of Subway Surfers something new to check out. But it's not just the updates that keep the game alive, it's the accessibility. In an era where mobile games rely on battle passes and microtransactions, Subway Surfers still feels like one of those games you can just pick up and play for free. There's no paywall blocking your progress, no ridiculous energy system stopping your runs, it's just pure simple fun. And if you still think that the game's just some relic from the past, Subway Surfers is now bigger than ever, which is most likely from the result of TikTok. People would take the original footage they recorded and slap on some Subway Surfers gameplay under it, creating the ultimate brain rot content. Some of these videos got tens of millions of views, likely giving Subway Surfers more exposure. Needless to say, Subway Surfers continues to dominate the mobile space, and it's one of the few OG games on this list that might just outlive us all. However, the same thing can't be said for Temple Run, a game that was once just as big as Subway Surfers, but completely fell off due to lack of innovation. When the game first launched back in 2011, it was an instant sensation. The simple controls and endless replayability made it one of the first mobile games to feel truly addictive. Temple Run was also one of the first games to be so popular that it spilled into mainstream pop culture, getting referenced in TV shows, being played by celebrities, and even getting official Disney collaborations with Temple Run Brave and The Wizard of Oz. In 2013, the studio behind the game released Temple Run 2 with better graphics, more obstacles, and a wide range of new power-ups, making it feel like a solid improvement over the original. But as the weeks went by, a huge problem arose. Temple Run 2 was basically just more of the same. Sure, the visuals were nicer and the environments had a little more variety to it, but at its core, it was basically the same game. Meanwhile, Subway Surfers, on the other hand, which came out a year after Temple Run, was constantly evolving with new maps, characters, and challenges, which is something that Temple Run dropped the ball with. After the success of the second game, they just stopped innovating. They stuck with the same old formula for countless years until it became stale, leaving everyone to get bored with the game. And by the late 2010s, Temple Run was no longer a major player in the gaming space, and the franchise was considered dead. If the developers had just put in the effort to reinvent the wheel and add exciting new features, it could have easily remained one of the biggest mobile games of all time. Up there with the GOATs, like Jetpack Joyride, a game that took the endless runner genre, but mixed it with high-speed action and creative power-ups. People seemed to love this game so much, it racked up hundreds of millions of downloads, got ported to consoles, and even had a dedicated fanbase that kept grinding for high scores long after the initial hype. Barry Steak Fries, the game's main character, also became one of the most recognizable mascots in mobile gaming. Needless to say, the game was on a roll, and it felt like it could stand the test of time. But as the mobile gaming industry evolved, Jetpack Joyride didn't. Just like what happened to Temple Run, Jetpack Joyride were stuck in the same content loop for several years, and the updates that they did receive were mostly just minor additions, like new jetpacks and skins. Then there was the monetization problem. Early on, Jetpack Joyride was praised for being a game that didn't feel predatory with its microtransactions. But as time went on, the studio started loading the game with a bunch of pay-to-win mechanics and aggressive in-game purchases. For years, fans begged Halfbrick to do something new with Jetpack Joyride. However, that begging would often lead to nothing. Until February of 2021, almost out of nowhere, they would announce Jetpack Joyride 2. With an updated art style, new power-ups, even a story mode. It was exactly what the franchise needed. But there was a catch. Instead of releasing Jetpack Joyride 2 as a free-to-play game like the original, they would make Jetpack Joyride 2 an Apple Arcade exclusive, instantly killing all of its momentum. By locking the game behind a paywall, the game had no real chance to get that kind of mainstream attention that could bring players back into the franchise. And to make things worse, Jetpack Joyride 2 wasn't even that much of an improvement. While it had all of the new visuals and a bit more structure, it failed to capture the same magic that made the original a hit. They would try to strike gold again a few years later by launching Jetpack Joyride Test Labs. This was meant to be a fresh take on the jetpack formula by adding new experimental gameplay features, but once again, it never really took off. However, despite the failure of Test Labs and Jetpack Joyride 2, the original game still gets updates to this day, which is something that can't be said for Where's My Water, a charming puzzle classic released by Disney that was completely abandoned. With its unique mechanics and clever design, Where's My Water quickly became one of Disney's most successful mobile games. And after seeing the massive praise online, they wasted no time expanding in the franchise. In 2012, just a year after the first game's release, they came out with Where's My Perry. It featured the same core mechanics as the original game, along with some unique elements tied to the show's spy theme. They also released even more spin-offs, such as Where's My Holiday and Where's My Summer, though these were mostly just seasonal reskins of the original game. Where's My Mickey, on the other hand, was drastically different, featuring its own unique puzzles and a more story-driven experience with the iconic Mickey Mouse. At this point, it was clear to Disney that they saw the Where's My Water franchise as more than just a one-off hit. But just as quickly as the franchise was expanding, it was about to hit a major roadblock. In September of 2013, Disney would release Where's My Water 2, the first true sequel into the original game. This game should have been a major step forward for the franchise, offering new mechanics, levels, and challenges, but instead, it became the game that signaled the beginning of the end. Unlike the first game, which was just a one-time purchase, Where's My Water 2 embraced the free-to-play model. This meant adding tons of paywalls and microtransactions, which frustrated fans of the franchise. The gameplay itself was still fun, but it felt more restrictive, as players were often forced to wait for their energy to refill unless they were willing to pay. By 2014, Disney started noticing a decline in the numbers and was forced to make a difficult decision. Unlike Disney's other flagship brands, like Marvel or Star Wars,
Where's My Water was just another mobile game in their massive portfolio.
So rather than invest resources into reviving the game, Disney simply decided to pull the plug. Following the discontinuation of Where's My Water, Disney would remove all of the spin-offs from the App Store.
And in 2016, the studio behind the mobile games were shut down, meaning any new updates or installments in the franchise seemed pretty unlikely. Flappy Bird, on the other hand, unfortunately got the same fate, with the original developer of the game permanently deleting it from the internet. But it wasn't always like this. In 2013, Dong Nguyen was just a chill guy living freely in Vietnam. He had spent the past couple of years developing some small indie games, until he would make one game that would change his life forever. With its simple controls and endless replayability, Flappy Bird easily hit #1 on the App Store, and by the start of 2014, the game had already hit 50 million downloads. Needless to say, Dong was rolling in that money, making an estimated $50,000 a day just from ad revenue alone. To the outside world, Dong was living the dream life, becoming a millionaire almost overnight.
But what should have been the happiest moment of his career quickly turned into his worst nightmare.
Media outlets ran endless stories about the game, calling it lazy, accusing Dong of stealing assets from Mario Brothers, and labeling Flappy Bird as too addictive, warning parents to keep it away from their children. People also began flooding Dong's social media with messages claiming, "Flappy Bird has ruined my life." For most developers, this kind of criticism is just part of the job. But for Dong, it became a personal nightmare. He was now spending hours each day replying to messages, trying to defend himself, but the more he engaged, the worse things got. And even if he decided to escape social media, the outside world was 10 times worse. A Vietnamese news station managed to track down where Dong lived and ran a story about him, exposing his identity to the entire country. Local newspapers were now hounding him for interviews. Paparazzi were camped outside his house and followed him wherever he went. With all of the pressure mounting online and in the real world, Dong's life was spiraling out of control. So on February 8th of 2014, he would have enough and announce he was shutting Flappy Bird down for good, destroying the thing that made his life a living hell. And after 10 years of the game being shut down, it worked out for him. Dong is now living a much more peaceful life in Vietnam, still making some mobile games on the side, but has no intention in bringing back Flappy Bird anytime soon. So if you want a chance to play the original game again, you can still find it in some arcades, where its last remnants remain today.